The company that owns Simplicity, McCall's, Vogue, and Butterick recently sold to a liquidation firm called Hillco Capital. And as of the time of this recording, they have announced Chapter 11 bankruptcy. We're going to talk about this and all of the issues surrounding it. And while we talk about it, I'm going to be doing some scrap busting in the background. So let's go ahead and get into it. I like to start out by just reading a small snippet from an article that I found here online. It's going back and talking a little bit about the history. So it says, some may be surprised to learn that all of the major legacy sewing pattern brands were owned by a single company, a phenomenon that came about through a series of acquisitions over several years. In December of 2016, a company called CSS Industries, which primarily specializes in gift wraps and seasonal gift items, acquired the McCall Pattern Company for $14 million. Then in fall of 2017, CSS Industries bought Simplicity Creative Group from Wilton Brands for $64 million, consolidating the big four sewing pattern brands under one corporate owner. This consolidation may appear to have presented a monopoly, with a single company buying up all of its competitors, but the Federal Trade Commission, the government agency that is in charge of breaking up monopolies, didn't regard it as one. The deal came in under FTC's threshold of $80.8 million and went unchallenged. A few years later, in January of 2020, a UK-based gift and party company called IG Design Group acquired CSS Industries in an all-cash transaction in a deal valued at approximately $88 million. This acquisition doubled the size of IG Design Group's business. Now, IG Design Group has sold its U.S. division, a piece of which includes the big four pattern brands, to a liquidator. Okay, so we're going to pause right here and go back and see what happened after they were acquired by IG Group in January of 2020, because I find that very interesting. Okay, so this article comes from the Mercury, which is in Kansas, and it's called Last Run, McCall Patterns Local Printing Facility, which has printed most of the nation's sewing patterns for more than 50 years, to close by end of year. And the article is dated June of 2021. It reads as follows: McCall Pattern Company Manhattan printing facility, which produces the sewing patterns for most of the major national sewing pattern companies in the U.S., is closing after more than 50 years. The Manhattan facility has 85 employees and will close permanently at the end of the year, says Abby Small, Executive Vice President and General Manager of the Craft Division at Design Group, the company that owns McCall. It was a very difficult decision that the company made, Small said. We're grateful for the decades of valued experience and commitment of all the employees. Small said the company is moving the Manhattan printing to its facilities in Nenana, I don't know how to pronounce that, Wisconsin. If I butchered that, then I'm sorry. McCall's printing facility has been based in Manhattan since 1969, and in 1970 expanded its space on what is now McCall Road, a 4,700 square to 4,000 square feet. It employs as many as 1,000 people in the 1970s and about 500 people in the 80s. Okay, so they tremendously decreased the amount of people that they had on staff from the 70s to the 80s. And I suppose that was because less people were sewing by that time. It says, Small said at the height of its facility printing, and it folded about 200 million patterns a year. Today it's down to 20 to 30 million. So that's a tremendous decrease in the amount of patterns that got printed because I suppose that less people sew. We have gotten the meat out of that article. Now I would like to go over to a independent pattern company and read their article from 2022, because what most people don't realize is that when that McCall's pattern printing plant closed, it affected the entire industry because they were one of the only printers of tissue paper patterns and had one of the only machines in the entire country. So let me go ahead and read what this folkwear patterns with timeless style has to say. And this article is dated May 31st of 2022. It reads as follows. You may have heard from other small independent pattern companies, but we are changing up how our sewing patterns are printed. We are transitioning our pattern printing away from the way our patterns have been printed for decades. While this behind the scenes decision making in our company could remain behind the scenes, I thought you might like to know why some of our patterns are out of print, just available as PDF, or why the prices are going up. This story isn't only about supply chain issues. Although they do affect us, pricing, gas, transportation, and paper shortages hit all industries. Okay, so this article is being written shortly after the 2020 lockdowns. There were a ton of supply chain problems, and I don't know why everybody wanted toilet paper, but everybody did. And I just thought about that when she was talking about paper shortages. So let's go ahead and keep reading. This story is about how and why our patterns are available in different formats, and why it is my goal to have nearly all, if not all, our patterns available as paper patterns, while also digitizing our patterns so they can be available as PDF patterns and be preserved for the future. For many years, we have printed our pattern tissues, instructions, and covers at McCall's printing facility in Kansas. McCall's Printing and the Associated Pattern Company was bought by a large multinational corporation several years ago. They changed their business strategies. Okay, so now we're getting into talking something about design group, or this is what they are implying at least. This past fall, they shut down the Kansas plant and transitioned to a plant near Chicago, eliminating the only printer in the country who could print on wide format tissue. This printer served most small independent sewing pattern companies like ours. With the new plant, our pattern minimums increased by double, and the only tissue option was a lighter tissue that we normally print on. We have printed on number 12 white tissue for the last 5 years, and the new option would only be number 8 brown. This much higher minimum order would also mean that it would not make sense to continue to print our patterns that sell slowly. If I ordered 1,000 of a slow selling pattern, it could take 20 years to sell them at their typical rate. Okay, so because we have this private equity firm owning the only tissue paper printer in the entire United States, it has affected a lot of things because they shut it down, and now all of the smaller pattern companies are being affected by this because the minimums are higher. So that is something that not a lot of people have mentioned. So I think that this article is very telling. Let's keep reading for just a little bit and see what else they have to say. If I ordered 1,000 of a slow selling pattern, it could take 20 years to sell them at their typical rate. That means 5+ years to break even on the investment, and we have to store the patterns and pay for the place to store them. Okay, so that's something else important. It takes up a lot of space to store patterns. And the more space that you're taking up on items that cannot be sold, the less money that you get to make. It does not make economic sense for a business like ours. The seemingly best business option is to only do PDF patterns, especially for those slower selling patterns. Okay, so I believe that we have gotten the meat out of this article for right now. We might come back to it, but what I do think is that that is why many of the patterns over the past couple of years have gone PDF, and I know that us traditional sewists really do love to have the printed tissue paper patterns. I know me personally, I like to have tissue printed patterns because I can cut them out and then tape them together and try them on before I actually do cut out my fabric. Whereas if I am to get a PDF pattern, then I have to print that out on my printer, tape all the pieces together, cut it out, and then I have to retrace it again on a piece of tissue paper. Well, I use medical table paper. I have to trace it out again so that I can fit it to my body and try it on before I actually cut it out on real fabric. So that's doing like 3 or 4 extra steps that I wouldn't have to do if I just had the tissue paper pattern to begin with. I really like this article, so I'm going to go on down a couple of paragraphs and see if there's anything else in here that might be of interest. We are currently working on 2 printers who can print at reasonable prices. They print on bond paper, which is not the tissue paper we prefer, but still lightweight enough and is more durable than tissue. As we have sized patterns up, we also have to use more paper to print the patterns, which also affects the price of the pattern. Okay, so the girlies out here that are more full-figured, because of needing to create more sizing, then you are using up more paper, which costs the company more money. So it's not because pattern companies don't want to be inclusive that they don't include larger sizes. It's more so because of their bottom line and how much it costs them to be able to print. And I know that's an inconvenience because people come in all shapes and sizes, but that is a major factor. Okay, let me keep reading. In some cases, very large pattern pieces won't fit on the paper available to print. We have to tile the pattern, and you will need to place the pattern tissue next to each other to get the full pattern. For the largest pattern pieces, the price is higher because the printers need to charge more to meet their bottom line. This means some of our pattern pieces will need to go up to afford the printing. I'm sorry, I think I read that wrong. This means some of our pattern prices will need to go up to afford the printing, but most will remain close in price to what we have currently. Because these printers do not have minimums, we can print the number of patterns we need, which does save us some overhead costs and makes it convenient to make pattern changes or even offer new patterns. We are using a local print shop for all of our instructions and covers now, and we are assembling patterns in-house. Okay, so these companies are having to assemble the patterns in-house, which obviously they have to pay staff in order to do that. So that is why you're paying $20, $25 for a single pattern, when back in the day, you could get a pattern for $1 or $2. So that's part of what's going on that's really not being discussed. And I think that is really important that we talk about this thing. Okay, there's one other thing that I wanted to talk about concerning this issue. So everything is interconnected. So the 2020 lockdowns affected the business. Then, too, when they were acquired by the design group, they wanted to cut costs. So, of course, they closed the McCall's paper pattern printing facility, which in turn affected the entire industry and all of the indie pattern makers. Okay. Now we walk forward to the closure of Joann Fabrics. And for those of you who don't know, Design Group of Americas not only owns the printed patterns, but they also sell other items too that were sold at Joann. So when Joann closed, that cut out a huge amount of their business, and they lost a tremendous amount of money because now they don't have any physical location to sell their patterns. And I know that some of the patterns are for sale at places like Walmart and Hobby Lobby, but their other items that they had are not. So they've needed to cut something out of their business in order to make things work. And I'm thinking that the patterns are going to be first on the chopping block because the share of consumers who actually purchase tissue printed patterns is decreasing as more indie pattern makers begin to produce digital patterns. And here's what my thinking is about this. So, as we discussed before, sizing is limited on patterns, especially the commercial patterns, because it costs them more to have to provide more sizing because they have to use more paper. So that excluded a lot of people from purchasing patterns from the big pattern brands because the patterns didn't come in their size. So that's one of the issues. Then another one of the issues is that the directions on these commercial patterns tends to be quite crappy. A couple of weeks ago, I made a couple of items and I was really shocked by how terrible the printed patterns were. Like they wanted me to sew in the sleeve after I had basically sewn up the shoulder seams, so I would have to work in a circle. And I thought that was really stupid because you can just sew the sleeve on flat and then make the tube at a later time. So that way you're not working in a circle for the entire project. But that was an oversight for them because they did not think about that when they wrote the pattern and didn't make it very convenient for the person using the pattern to actually make it. Another thing is that these paper patterns virtually never tell you how to finish the inside seams. And sometimes you need to know how to finish the inside before you construct the garment because it makes it that much harder to construct it backwards, basically. So that is yet another issue. So there's just so many issues with having paper patterns. And I know for me personally, because the paper patterns cost so much money, I don't want to cut them out. So what I end up doing is using medical table paper and tracing off all the patterns. And that takes 2 times as long to do it that way. And 2, I noticed that virtually none of the paper patterns fit my body out of the box. So I have to trace them off to make the pattern alterations. And at the end of the day, once all is said and done, I feel like it just wastes a lot of time to even try to use a paper pattern for those reasons. And I know you might be thinking, well, what is the alternative? I tried PDF patterns, but I'm not a fan because there's only 2 options. One, you print it out on your printer at home and tape all them pieces together. And then go and use medical table paper to trace off the pattern so that you can pattern fit it to your body before you actually cut it out on your true fabric. Or two, you can take it to a print shop and have them to print it out. Then you're spending way more money on the pattern. And what I have learned is that a lot of these PDF patterns are not cheaper than purchasing the printed off pattern. So now you're spending the cost of what a regular pattern would cost, plus the additional cost of having that item printed. And then two, you might even have to trace it off so that you can try it on your body, because printed paper is just way too stiff to pattern fit to your body. So those are the issues with that. Now, for this video, I decided to try using a vinyl cutter, and there was a vinyl cutter in my attic because we had a t-shirt business at one point, and we don't use vinyl when we don't do t-shirts that often anymore. But when we do t-shirts, we don't use a vinyl cutter. We have other processes that are quicker and faster than that now. So the vinyl cutter is kind of taking a back seat. But I pulled it out of the attic and traced off a pattern that I found online. And I found that there's very few patterns that are set up for use of a vinyl cutter because usually the PDF patterns have all of the lines drawn for all of the sizes, and you need to delete the other sizes so that the plotter is not tracing out all of the sizes and taking a tremendous amount of time. I just traced off a small sample size piece so that you could get an idea of what it looks like. Let's go ahead and roll that clip. So this is what the final product looks like, and this is just a sample so that I can see how to work this cutting machine. But I think that it turned out pretty good. What do you think? Overall, I find that using the vinyl cutter does eliminate my need to trace off the pattern on a piece of medical table paper, and because it traces it for me. But I still do have to make those pattern alterations and try on the pieces. And I'm not really a fan of the vinyl cutter because the vinyl cutter is huge. It takes up a lot of space, and it also is very noisy. And not only is it noisy and big and bulky, but it takes forever to trace off the pieces. And it will be fine if I didn't have to eliminate other sizes from a pattern in order to be able to trace it. But since I have to trace off all of the different sizes as well, then it makes it take 3 times as long as it would normally take to do it. So I'm not really a fan of that method, and I don't foresee that being the method that most people use in the future. I think the most popular option is to use a projector to project the pattern onto your fabric. But like I said before, most patterns today do not fit your body out of the box. So you have to make pattern alterations. So that too will mean that you need to trace off that projector pattern onto a sheet of paper first, which is time consuming. The other issue that I find with using the projector is that you need to line everything up exactly right. And if it's not lined up correctly, then your pattern will come out wonky. And I'm not a fan of having to line up the projector with the grid and make sure that it's 100% and do all of that jazz in order to get it done. But I do think that it will be the future. And I have this article here that explains just why the projector could be the future. Okay, this article comes from PR Newswire. It's called 3D Generative AI Transformations, How We Create, Design, Interact with Digital Content. And it was made in June of 2025. I'm going to read a small snippet here, and it reads as follows. A team of computer scientists at University of California, Los Angeles, and University of Utah are proposing a solution with a new generative AI tool called DRESS 1 to 3. This novel end-to-end system transforms a single photograph into fully separatable, simulation-ready 3D garments, complete with sewing patterns, textures, materials, parameters, and a posed human body. What sets it apart is that the resulting assets are not just visually realistic, but physically accurate and immediately usable in downstream applications such as cloth simulation, virtual try-ons, and digital fashion workflows, all from just one casual image. Okay, so what I'm really thinking about all of that is that in the future, you will be able to plug in all of your body measurements into the computer, and that it will alter the PDF pattern to fit your body based on your measurements. And then all you will have to do is simply project the pattern onto your fabric, cut it out, and then sew it up. And then that will be it. But we are probably a couple years away from AI being that good to be able to do that. I could be wrong, but that's just my thoughts. But what do you all think about the big four pattern brands going into bankruptcy and all of the things that are happening with the tissue paper patterns and the new options that are available? Please let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, as I'd love to hear from you. I thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.